Barry Lukaitis. Barry Dale Lukaitis was born on February 26, 1981, and grew up in Moses Lake, Washington. His family life was marked by dysfunction, with his parents' separation in 1995 and their impending divorce creating significant emotional turmoil. The 14-year-old struggled with clinical depression, for which he was prescribed Ritalin. His mother, Joanne Phillips, made the situation worse by sharing her own thoughts of ending her life with her young son, even planning a Valentine's Day attempt and suggesting he join her. This inappropriate burden, placed on a young teenager dealing with his own mental health challenges, created a toxic psychological environment. Lukaitis became heavily influenced by various forms of media that depicted violence. He misinterpreted Pearl Jam's song Jeremy as being about a school incident, when in reality the song was about something different. He read Stephen King's novel Rage, which featured a student taking his class hostage after harming teachers. And he watched films like Natural Born Killers and The Basketball Diaries that glorified or depicted violence. These influences, combined with his deteriorating mental state and family situation, created a dangerous mindset where he began to see violence as a potential solution to his problems or a way to express his pain. On February 2, 1996, Lukaitis dressed in black clothing resembling a gunslinger and walked to Frontier Middle School. He carried his father's rifle and 2 handguns into his 5th period algebra class. What happened next would forever change the small community of Moses Lake. He opened fire on students Arnold Fritz and Manuel Vela Jr., both 14 years old, taking their lives. Another student, 13-year-old Natalie Hintz, was critically wounded in the arm and abdomen. When teacher Leona Kyers, 49, turned around, he shot her fatally in the chest. After the shooting stopped, Lukaitis held his classmates hostage. He quoted a line from the novel Rage, saying, "This sure beats algebra," showing how the fictional story had influenced his actions. The situation could have been even worse if not for the quick thinking of gym coach John Lane, who volunteered himself as a hostage to get close to Lukaitis. Lane then disarmed and subdued him until police arrived. The classroom floor was littered with dozens of shell casings. Lukaitis was immediately arrested. Due to the publicity surrounding the case, he was tried as an adult in Seattle. His defense team entered an insanity plea, with psychiatrists testifying about his delusions and mood swings, suggesting possible bipolar or dysthymic disorder. However, prosecutors presented evidence of premeditation, arguing that he had planned the attack. Later, Lukaitis would claim the shootings were partly accidental and that he had only intended to target one specific student. But the evidence suggested otherwise. On September 24, 1997, he was convicted of 2 first-degree charges, 1 second-degree charge, 1 attempted count, and 16 aggravated kidnappings. He received 2 life sentences plus 205 years without the possibility of parole. However, U.S. Supreme Court rulings regarding juvenile sentencing led to a resentencing hearing in 2017, where his sentence was reduced to 189 years. He waived his right to further appeals and remains incarcerated at Clallam Bay Corrections Center in Washington. During his 2017 resentencing, Lukaitis issued an apology, stating, "I am sorry for what I did. What I did was weak and evil and senseless." Survivor Natalie Hintz spoke about the lasting impact, saying, "My childhood ended that day." Leona Kerr's daughter expressed the depth of her loss, noting that her mother died with chalk in one hand and an eraser in the other, emphasizing how Kerrs had been doing her job as an educator when her life was taken. While media influenced one case, obsessive jealousy would drive the next to horrific extremes. Melinda Loveless. Melinda Loveless was born on October 28, 1975, and experienced a difficult childhood. Her father, Larry, was reportedly involved in troubling behavior, and the household was marked by dysfunction. By the time she was 16, Loveless was in a relationship with another young woman named Amanda Hevron. When Hevron began a friendship with 12-year-old Shandash Scherer, Loveless became consumed by jealousy, viewing Scherer as a romantic rival who threatened her relationship. Loveless's jealousy manifested in threatening behavior, including confronting Scherer at a school dance. Rather than moving past these feelings, she began plotting revenge against the younger person she saw as an obstacle to her happiness. She recruited 3 other teenagers, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Tony Lawrence, to help carry out her plan. On January 10, 1992, the group lured Scherer from her father's home in Jeffersonville, Indiana, by claiming they would take her to meet Hevron. What followed was a night of extreme cruelty that shocked investigators and the community. The group took Scherer to a location known as the Witch's Castle, where Loveless interrogated her at knife point. They bound Scherer and subjected her to prolonged mistreatment before placing her in the trunk of their car. The group drove to Tackett's home, where the situation escalated further. Eventually, they took Scherer to a field in Madison, where they doused her with gasoline and set her on fire while she was still alive. Incredibly, after committing this act, the group went to McDonald's for breakfast, with some reportedly making disturbing jokes about what they had done. Scherer's body was discovered on January 11th and identified through dental records. The investigation moved quickly as Lawrence and Rippey confessed and implicated Loveless and Tackett as the primary perpetrators. All 4 were arrested and faced serious charges. Rather than face trial, all 4 accepted plea agreements. Loveless and Tackett each received 60-year sentences, reflecting their roles as the instigators and primary actors in the crime. The younger participants, Lawrence and Rippey, received shorter sentences due to their lesser involvement and cooperation with authorities. Immediately after the incident, Loveless reportedly stated, "I'm glad she's dead. I'm glad she's out of me and Amanda's life," showing no remorse at that time. This statement demonstrated the depth of her obsession and her inability to comprehend the enormity of what she had done. However, over the decades in prison, Loveless would reportedly show signs of change and remorse. After serving 26 years, Loveless was released in 2019. Tackett had been released a year earlier in 2018. The releases were controversial, with many questioning whether any amount of prison time could be sufficient for such acts. Shandash Scherer's mother eventually made peace with the situation, stating, "It's my choice to make. If you don't let good things come from bad things, nothing gets better," demonstrating remarkable grace in the face of unimaginable loss. From jealousy to a school dispute that turned fatal in seconds. Jalen Prince. Jalen Rushan Prince was 16 years old when his life changed forever at Joppatown High School in Maryland. He had a documented history of behavioral issues at school, with 18 recorded incidents involving disputes and confrontational behavior. Prince had obtained a firearm, claiming he needed it for protection after losing friends to street incidents, but carrying it to school represented a dangerous escalation. On September 6, 2024, a dispute in a school bathroom changed multiple lives forever. The conflict involved Prince's girlfriend and another student, 15-year-old Warren Grant. What should have been resolved through words or school intervention instead became deadly. Prince followed Grant into the bathroom and, according to evidence presented at trial, threatened him multiple times before the situation escalated. Witnesses and video evidence showed that Prince threatened to shoot Grant 4 times, cocked the weapon, and then fired, striking Grant fatally. Prince would later claim the shooting was accidental and that Grant had been the aggressor, but the evidence contradicted his version of events. After the shooting, Prince fled the school, discarding the gun, which was never recovered by authorities. The investigation relied heavily on witness testimony, video footage from school cameras, and evidence from Prince's phone. These pieces of evidence painted a clear picture of what had occurred in that bathroom. Prince was arrested and faced charges of first-degree homicide, a serious charge that would be tried in adult court given the nature of the offense. His trial lasted 8 days in May 2025, with prosecutors presenting the video evidence and witness testimony. The defense attempted to argue that Prince had acted in self-defense or that the shooting was accidental. But the jury found the evidence of premeditation compelling. The multiple threats before the shooting, the deliberate cocking of the weapon, and the fact that he had brought a gun to school all suggested planning, rather than a spontaneous reaction. The jury found Prince guilty of first-degree charges. On October 14, 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison with all but 75 years suspended for the main charge, plus 20 years with 5 to be served for the handgun violation. The total sentence of 80 years meant Prince would be eligible for parole after 40 years, but he would serve a minimum of decades behind bars. During proceedings, Prince maintained his claim that, "I did not fire the gun, it accidentally went off," refusing to accept responsibility for his actions. State's Attorney Allison M. Healy argued that, "He is continuing his pattern of violence. He's a threat to public safety," pointing to his history of confrontational behavior as evidence that the shooting was part of a larger pattern rather than an isolated incident. Victim impact statements described Grant as selfless, loving, painting a picture of a 15-year-old whose life was cut short over a dispute that should never have turned violent. While one shooting occurred in a school bathroom, the next case would involve meticulous planning for mass harm. Nicholas Prosper. Nicholas Prosper was born around 2006 in Luton, England, and by his teenage years had developed a disturbing obsession. He spent extensive time online consuming content about mass incidents, particularly focusing on events like Sandy Hook and Columbine. His internet history revealed deep engagement with extreme content and a fixation on becoming infamous through violence. He specifically admired perpetrators he viewed as successful in gaining notoriety. Prosper developed a plan to carry out an attack at St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School, with the goal of harming 34 people to match or exceed previous incidents. He modeled his planning after Adam Lanza, the perpetrator of the Sandy Hook incident, viewing him as a template for achieving the infamy he craved. The planning was detailed and showed significant premeditation. However, before he could carry out his school plan, something happened at home. On September 13, 2024, Prosper turned his weapon on his own family. He shot his mother, Juliana Prosper, who was 48, in the head. He then targeted his siblings. After shooting his brother, he inflicted over 100 additional wounds, demonstrating extreme actions beyond what was necessary. To obtain the weapon used in these acts, Prosper had forged a shotgun license and purchased the firearm on September 12th, just 1 day before the incident. This showed planning and intent, as he had deliberately circumvented legal restrictions to arm himself. He also created a pre-recorded video that he posted online, suggesting he wanted to document or publicize his actions. After harming his family, Prosper surrendered to police at 7:55 in the morning, telling officers, "It's not murder." This statement revealed his distorted thinking about his actions. suggesting he believed his conduct was justified or somehow different from what it clearly was. His calm surrender and bizarre statement disturbed investigators. Rather than face trial, Prosper pleaded guilty on February 24, 2025, to 3 counts and weapons charges. He was sentenced on March 19, 2025, to life in prison with a minimum of 49 years before parole consideration. Prosecutors had sought a whole life order, meaning he would never be released. But this appeal was denied on July 16, 2025, meaning he retained the possibility of eventual parole after serving the minimum term. During sentencing, the judge acknowledged the severity, stating, "Appalling though these crimes were," while balancing the need for punishment with legal requirements around sentencing. Prosper's father, who lost his wife and 2 other family members, remarkably stated, "I still love you, son. It's not your fault," demonstrating forgiveness that many found incomprehensible given the circumstances. Prosper himself made statements including, "I am the chosen one, chosen by Clementine," referencing some delusional belief system that remained unclear to authorities. From planning mass harm to committing an act described as a thrill-seeking experience. Alyssa Bustamante. Alyssa Bustamante was born on January 28, 1994, and had a troubled background. In 2007, at age 13, she had attempted to end her own life and required hospitalization. This should have been a warning sign of serious mental health struggles that required ongoing treatment and supervision. Instead, the situation would escalate to something far worse. On October 21, 2009, 15-year-old Bustamante committed an act that would shock even experienced investigators. She lured 9-year-old neighbor Elizabeth Olton into the woods near their Missouri homes. What happened next was not an impulsive act of anger or the result of a dispute. It was something much more disturbing. Bustamante harmed Olton in multiple ways before ending her life. She then placed the body in a grave she had dug beforehand, showing this was a premeditated act rather than something that happened spontaneously. The planning involved in digging the grave ahead of time demonstrated clear intent and forethought. What made this case particularly disturbing was Bustamante's own explanation of her motive. Her diary entry revealed she had done this simply to experience what taking a life felt like. Writing, "I just killed someone. It was amazing." The misspelling of "amazing" couldn't diminish the horror of her statement. She went on to describe the experience in chilling terms, noting, "It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, 'oh my God, I can't do this' feeling, it's pretty enjoyable." Bustamante was arrested on October 23, 2009, after authorities discovered her diary. The diary provided clear evidence of both the crime and her mindset. The casual way she described taking another person's life as an experience to be enjoyed shocked investigators and the community. Rather than face trial, Bustamante accepted a plea agreement in January 2012, pleading guilty to second-degree charges and armed criminal action. In February 2012, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus 30 years consecutive. This meant she would serve a very long sentence before even being eligible for parole consideration. Her first parole hearing took place in July 2024 and was denied. The parole board determined she had not served enough time and that public safety required her continued incarceration. Her next parole hearing is scheduled for 2029, at which point she will have served 20 years of her sentence. While Bustamante acted alone for personal thrills, the next case would involve gang affiliation and street dynamics. Julian Hutton Reed. Julian Hutton Reed was 16 years old in 2023 when he became involved in a shooting near the University of Nevada, Reno campus. The incident occurred at a Reno apartment complex and was connected to ongoing gang tensions in the area. Gang involvement had been a reality for some youth in the community, with territorial disputes and rivalries occasionally turning deadly. After a verbal altercation between members of rival groups, Hutton Reed received a firearm from an associate. The dispute could have ended with words or even fists. But the introduction of the weapon changed everything. Hutton Reed then pursued 17-year-old Santiago Rodriguez, who was trying to leave the area. Hutton Reed shot Rodriguez 7 times, with 2 of the shots striking him after he had already fallen to the ground. The fact that he continued shooting after Rodriguez was demonstrated intent beyond simply defending himself or his associates. This was an execution-style shooting. After the shooting, Hutton Reed worked to destroy evidence that could link him to the crime, showing he understood the gravity of what he had done. The investigation into Rodriguez's passing involved tracing the weapon, interviewing witnesses, and gathering physical evidence from the scene. Gang-related shootings can be difficult to prosecute because witnesses may be reluctant to cooperate with law enforcement, either out of fear of retaliation or due to community norms against cooperating with police. However, investigators were able to build a strong enough case to bring charges. Rather than face trial, Hutton Reed accepted a plea agreement in which he pleaded guilty to first-degree charges with use of a deadly weapon, possession of a concealed firearm, and destruction of evidence. The multiple charges reflected the various illegal actions he had taken. Not just the shooting itself, but also possessing the weapon illegally and attempting to cover up the crime. On October 17, 2025, Hutton Reed was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, plus consecutive sentences of 8 to 20 years for the other charges. This meant he would serve at least 20 years before even being eligible for parole consideration, and likely longer, given the additional consecutive time. During sentencing, Deputy District Attorney Jeff Hopp stated that Hutton Reed is an extreme danger, executed him in cold blood, emphasizing the calculated nature of the shooting. The judge compared Hutton Reed to a ticking time bomb, suggesting that his continued presence in society posed an ongoing threat that required incarceration. While gang dynamics drove one case, the next would involve someone tormented by peers at school. Michael Carneal. Michael Adam Carneal was born in 1983 and grew up in West Paducah, Kentucky. By the time he was a 14-year-old freshman at Heath High School, he had become a target for persistent mistreatment from other students. The teasing and harassment took a toll on his mental health, contributing to feelings of isolation and unworthiness. He felt unloved and developed paranoid thoughts about those around him. Carneal began showing warning signs that something was wrong, stealing firearms and telling others that something big was going to happen. These statements should have been taken as serious threats requiring immediate intervention, but they either weren't reported or weren't acted upon with sufficient urgency. He was later diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder, a condition that affects thinking patterns and can lead to unusual beliefs and social difficulties. On December 1, 1997, Carneal brought firearms to school and carried out an attack that would shock the community. He opened fire on a prayer group that had gathered in the school's lobby, taking the lives of 3 young women and wounding 5 others. The targeting of a prayer group added a particularly disturbing element to the attack, as these were students simply practicing their faith before the school day began. Unlike some perpetrators who flee or continue their attacks until stopped, Carneal immediately surrendered after the shooting. He reportedly said, "Kill me, please. "I can't believe I did that," showing immediate remorse and shock at his own actions. This immediate expression of regret suggested that once the moment of violence had passed, he was confronted with the horrific reality of what he had done. Carneal was charged and tried as an adult despite his age. In October 1998, he entered a plea of guilty but mentally ill. This plea acknowledged that while he had committed the acts and was legally responsible, his mental illness had played a significant role in his actions. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. After serving his minimum sentence, Carneal became eligible for parole in 2022. However, his parole was denied, and his sentence was converted to life without the possibility of parole. The parole board and legal system determined that despite his remorse and the time served, he should remain incarcerated for the rest of his life. In statements made during his parole hearing, Carneal expressed ongoing guilt, saying, "Sometimes I think I deserve to be killed." His continued remorse decades after the incident suggested genuine recognition of the harm he caused. But the parole board felt that public safety and justice for the victims required his continued incarceration. For the families of the 3 young women who lost their lives and the 5 who were wounded, Carneal's expressions of remorse could never undo the damage. The attack occurred at the beginning of a school day, in a place that should have been safe, and targeted students engaged in peaceful religious practice. The impact rippled through the West Paducah community for years afterward. If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. While mistreatment contributed to one case, the next would involve delusions of an entirely different nature. Roderick "Rod" Farrell. Roderick Farrell was born on March 28, 1980, in Murray, Kentucky. His upbringing was unusual, with a young mother who introduced him to concepts of vampirism through role-playing games and alternative belief systems. By his teenage years, Farrell had developed an identity centered around vampire mythology. He claimed to be a 500-year-old vampire and led a group known as the Vampire Clan, attracting other troubled teenagers who were drawn to the dark imagery and sense of belonging the group provided. The Vampire Clan engaged in various rituals and behaviors designed to reinforce their vampire identities. These activities, while disturbing, remained mostly in the realm of fantasy until Farrell connected with Heather Wendorf, a teenager in Eustis, Florida, who wanted to escape her home life. Heather's desire to leave her family would set in motion a chain of events that ended in tragedy. On November 25, 1996, 16-year-old Farrell traveled to Florida with Howard Scott Anderson, another member of the clan. They went to the Wendorf home in Eustis with the stated purpose of helping Heather run away from her parents. However, the plan escalated far beyond simply assisting a runaway teenager. Farrell and Anderson bludgeoned Heather's parents, Richard Wendorf and Naoma Queen, causing their deaths in their own home. The attack was brutal, involving repeated blows that demonstrated extreme violence. The motive appeared to be a combination of Farrell's delusional belief system and a twisted desire to free Heather from parental control. The vampire mythology that had defined Farrell's identity seemed to have warped his perception of right and wrong. After taking the lives of Heather's parents, Farrell and his group fled Florida with Heather. They were eventually arrested in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, after authorities tracked them across state lines. The interstate nature of the crime meant federal authorities were involved, and the severity of the acts meant Farrell faced the most serious possible charges. Farrell pleaded guilty in 1998 to avoid trial. Despite his guilty plea, he initially received a death sentence, making him one of the youngest people ever sentenced to death in modern American history. However, His death sentence was commuted to life in prison in 2000, partly due to his age at the time of the crimes. He remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. During sentencing proceedings, the judge made a notable statement, saying, "Your family failed you. Your mother should also be on trial." This comment acknowledged the role that Farrell's upbringing played in shaping his delusional belief system. His mother's introduction to vampire mythology and alternative spirituality at a young age, combined with what appears to have been inadequate parental guidance and boundaries, contributed to the development of Farrell's dangerous worldview. The case became known as the Vampire Clan Murders and attracted significant media attention due to its unusual elements. The combination of teenage role-playing culture, vampire mythology, and extreme violence created a story that fascinated and horrified the public. It raised questions about the influence of role-playing games. Though most experts agreed that the games themselves were not the cause, but rather that troubled youth like Farrell used them to reinforce existing delusions. For Richard Wendorf and Naoma Queen's family, the bizarre motive made the tragedy even more difficult to comprehend. They had lost their loved ones not to a traditional crime like robbery or a personal dispute, but to a teenager's vampire fantasy and his desire to rescue their daughter. Heather would have to live with the knowledge that her desire to leave home had resulted in her parents' deaths, even if she hadn't directly participated in the violence. From cult delusions to a case where past experiences created an unstable situation. Eric Sweeney. Eric Sweeney was born around 2006 and experienced severe hardship from his earliest years. He suffered significant mistreatment from his birth mother, who struggled with substance issues. The home environment involved neglect and exposure to disturbing situations that no person should have to witness, particularly not during their formative years. These early experiences would leave lasting psychological scars. In 2019, Eric was placed with his brother Sean and Sean's wife Cassandra in Northfield, New Hampshire. The arrangement was meant to provide Eric with a more stable environment where he could begin to heal from his traumatic past. However, tensions developed in the household as Eric displayed behavioral issues that stemmed from his earlier experiences. The family tried to manage these challenges, but the situation proved more difficult than anticipated. On August 3rd, 2022, when Eric was 16 years old, something catastrophic occurred. He used a firearm to take the lives of Cassandra, who was 25 years old, and two young family members. The incident resulted in 3 deaths in what should have been a safe family home. The exact sequence of events and what triggered Eric's actions remained somewhat unclear, but the tragedy was undeniable. The case presented significant challenges for everyone involved. Eric's past experiences were well documented, and there was no question that he had suffered greatly before coming to live with his brother's family. However, that history, while providing context, couldn't excuse what he had done. The legal system had to balance recognition of his difficult background with accountability for taking 3 lives. Rather than proceed to trial, Eric accepted a plea agreement in August 2025, pleading guilty to 3 counts of second-degree charges. The second-degree charges, rather than first-degree, suggested that prosecutors acknowledged that this wasn't a premeditated act, but rather something that happened in the context of his mental state and circumstances. On October 3rd, 2025, Eric was sentenced to 60 years to life in prison. The sentence structure meant he would serve a minimum of 60 years before becoming eligible for parole consideration, though he could potentially serve longer or even the rest of his life, depending on future parole decisions. There was also mention of potential sentence reduction possibilities, though the details of what might allow for reduction weren't fully specified. During sentencing, Eric's defense team stated, "Eric is not a monster. He committed a monstrous crime," attempting to draw a distinction between Eric as a person shaped by past experiences and the terrible acts he committed. This statement encapsulated the central tension in the case. How to reconcile his status as someone who had suffered with his role as a perpetrator of extreme harm. Family members present at sentencing expressed their pain and anger. Some told Eric to rot in hell, words that reflected the depth of their grief and rage at the loss of Cassandra and the two young family members. For Sean Sweeney, the situation was especially complicated. He had lost his wife and children to his own brother, someone he had tried to help by providing a home. While past experiences shaped one case, the next would involve a relationship that parents tried to prevent. Jasmine Richardson. Jasmine Richardson was born in 1993 in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. As a 12-year-old, she met 23-year-old Jeremy Steinke at a concert. The significant age difference between them should have been an immediate red flag. But Richardson became involved in what she viewed as a romantic relationship with the much older Steinke. Steinke encouraged dark interests and fed into a rebellious mindset. When Richardson's parents, Mark and Deborah, learned about the relationship, they forbade it and grounded their daughter. This was a reasonable parental response to discovering their preteen was involved with an adult man. However, rather than accepting their decision, Richardson and Steinke began planning something horrific. The relationship had become so consuming that Richardson was willing to do anything to continue it. On April 23, 2006, the plan was put into action. Steinke entered the Richardson family home and attacked Mark and Deborah Richardson. Mark was harmed 24 times and Deborah 12 times. Attacks of such ferocity that they demonstrated extreme rage. But the situation didn't stop with the parents. Richardson's younger brother was also targeted, with Richardson herself participating before Steinke finished the act. The pair were arrested the following day in Saskatchewan after fleeing the scene. The investigation quickly established what had occurred, with forensic evidence and witness statements painting a clear picture of the planned family annihilation. Before the attacks, Steinke had written messages including, "Their blood shall be payment," showing the premeditated nature of the crimes. In 2007, Richardson was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree charges. However, because she was only 12 at the time of the crimes, she was sentenced under Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act. She received the maximum youth sentence of 10 years, which included time in both secure custody and conditional supervision in the community. Many felt this sentence was far too lenient given the severity of the crimes, but Canadian law limited what could be imposed on someone so young. Richardson was released in 2016 after serving her full 10-year sentence. She was given a new identity and allowed to reintegrate into society, a decision that sparked significant controversy. Critics argued that someone who had participated in taking 3 family members' lives shouldn't be given a fresh start with a new identity, while others argued that she had been manipulated by an adult predator when she was only 12 years old. Steinke, being an adult at the time of the crimes, faced far more severe consequences. He received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years. During Richardson's sentencing, the judge noted, "You've indicated a desire to atone," suggesting that Richardson had shown some remorse and willingness to take responsibility for her actions. For the extended Richardson family and the Medicine Hat community, the relatively short sentence and Richardson's eventual release with a new identity were difficult to accept. Mark, Deborah, and their young son were gone forever, while Richardson was given an opportunity to build a new life under a new name. While one case involved relationship dynamics, The next would center on prolonged mistreatment at school. Evan Ramsey. Evan Ramsey was born around 1981 and endured significant hardship throughout his childhood. His father was imprisoned, his mother struggled with substance issues, and he experienced mistreatment in foster homes. These early experiences left him without stable parenting or support systems that could have helped him develop healthy coping mechanisms. The difficulties accumulated over years, creating deep psychological wounds. By the time he was 16 and attending Bethel Regional High School in Alaska, Ramsey had become a target for persistent harassment from other students. He was nicknamed Screech and subjected to regular teasing that made his school experience miserable. The combination of his difficult background and the ongoing torment at school created a pressure cooker situation where his rage built to dangerous levels. On February 19, 1997, that rage exploded. Ramsey brought a shotgun to school and opened fire. He shot and took the life of fellow student Josh Palacios, who was 15 years old, and wounded 2 other students. He also took the life of Principal Ron Edwards, who may have been trying to intervene or stop the situation. The targeting of the principal suggested Ramsey viewed school authority figures as part of the system that had failed to protect him from harassment. After the shooting, Ramsey surrendered to police. Unlike some perpetrators who express immediate remorse, Ramsey's statements revealed a troubling disconnect from the reality of what he had done. He said, "I didn't realize that you shoot somebody, they die." A statement that suggested either genuine naivety about the consequences of his actions or psychological dissociation from the severity of what he had done. Ramsey was tried as an adult despite being 16 at the time of the shooting. He was sentenced to 198 years in prison, with the possibility of parole consideration in 2066. This extremely long sentence meant he would be elderly if he ever became eligible for parole, effectively ensuring he would spend the vast majority of his life incarcerated. In later years, Ramsey would express more appropriate remorse for his actions. He stated, "I can't say that I am sorry enough," acknowledging that no apology could undo the harm he caused. This evolved understanding suggested that over time, he had come to grasp the full magnitude of what he had done in a way he apparently hadn't immediately after the shooting. From one who faced harassment to another, who blamed romantic rejection and outside influences. Luke Woodham. Luke Woodham was born on February 5, 1981, in Pearl, Mississippi. As a teenager, he experienced mistreatment from peers and struggled with feelings of rejection and worthlessness. He became involved with a group called the Croth, which his peers described as having dark influences. The group provided a sense of belonging for young people who felt like outcasts, but it also reinforced destructive thoughts and encouraged harmful behavior. Months before his more notorious acts, Woodham harmed his dog in a manner that should have been recognized as a warning sign. Harming animals is a well-established predictor of potential harm toward humans. However, either the incident wasn't reported or it wasn't taken seriously enough to trigger intervention that might have prevented what came next. On October 1, 1997, Woodham began a rampage that would shock Mississippi. He started at home, where he attacked his mother Mary Ann, causing her death. After taking his mother's life, he drove to Pearl High School with a rifle, ready to continue his destructive path. At the school, Woodham opened fire on students. He specifically targeted his ex-girlfriend, Christina Menifee, and another student, Lydia K. Dew, both of whom died from their wounds. He also wounded 7 other students before he was stopped. The targeting of his ex-girlfriend suggested the attack was partly motivated by romantic rejection, while the additional victims represented a broader rage against those he felt had mistreated him. Assistant Principal Joel Myrick intervened by subduing Woodham, and holding him until police arrived. Myrick's actions likely prevented additional casualties, as Woodham was still armed when he was stopped. The quick thinking of school staff helped end the situation before it could become even worse. Woodham had written a manifesto explaining his actions. In it, he stated, "I am not insane, I am angry. Push us and we will push back," positioning himself as someone who had been driven to acts by the treatment he received. The manifesto blamed others for his actions, suggesting a refusal to take full responsibility for his choices and a belief that he was somehow justified in what he had done. Woodham was tried in 2 separate trials in 1998. He was convicted and received 3 life sentences plus 140 years, with the possibility of parole in 2046. The multiple life sentences reflected the severity and number of his crimes, taking his mother's life, 2 students' lives, and wounding 7 others. The lengthy sentence ensured he would spend decades incarcerated before even being considered for release. Later, Woodham would express remorse that seemed to contradict his earlier defiant stance. He said, "I'm sorry, I deserve the death penalty," acknowledging that his actions warranted the most severe punishment. This expression of remorse suggested that over time he had come to view his actions differently than he had in the immediate aftermath, when he was focused on blaming others through his manifesto. For the families of Marianne Woodham, Christina Menifee, and Lydia K. Dew, along with the 7 who survived their wounds, Woodham's later expressions of remorse couldn't undo the consequences. The Pearl community was left grappling with how a local teenager could have committed such acts and whether there were warning signs that should have triggered intervention before the tragedy occurred. The assistant principal who stopped Woodham became a hero, but the lives lost could never be recovered. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.